Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well. We worked hard last night, and you're so good at that stuff, translating my comments, all my excitement, say, isn't this wonderful? You know, everything is going to be okay.
Well, yeah.
And then you type it down, and it comes out differently.
Gloomy. Oh, no.
But anyway, it worked good. We had a lot of people paying attention. And it's one thing making quick comments, but sometimes those quick comments, are pretty important too. And a lot of people are watching. It was a different type of State of the Union message for sure, and. It was shrewd in many ways. It was catchy. It wasn't, at the beginning, at least the first half, 45 minutes, it was mostly, and even all through the speech was this emotionalism, bringing people on, which really gives me a lot of mixed feelings, about that, because I see some of those figures as tragic and sad, and sometimes they're the result of our policies, and it's a lot more complicated than just getting people to feel sad and sorry for people. But I really felt sorry for them because they seem to be going through a lot that's unnecessary, especially if some of them have suffered as a consequence of some of our policies. That's one thing, but then to put them through that. But I don't know how other people reacted to that. I just think that you can't solve serious problems with dwelling on emotionalism. We can't help but be emotional, at times with this. But boy, there was a lot of it last night, and I think it might have been Reagan or somebody that was the first one to started pointing into the balconies. And I remember one time when he did that when the plane went down on the Potomac, and there was a heroic action, and they brought that person on. But anyway, there was a lot of it last night, and we don't. You might make a comment about that, but I want to talk a little bit more about the net bottom line effects on this. Are we richer or poorer? We want America to be great, and we are great in many ways. But we have other concerns about what is it costing?
Yeah. Well, just on the delivery, on using that, it does play on emotions, but that really is. This is unfortunately what the Democrats, what the elites on the left don't understand. This is really how he got elected, whether we like it or not. Connecting with people on an emotional level. Those rallies were jam-packed, whereas Hillary had one or two people that looked like they were half dead. The populism is an effective tool, and I think he used it really to his advantage last night, even though the rest of us, I felt like maybe I was watching an Oprah episode, all of these emotional problems, and it was tragic to see, especially those two couples that lost their teenage daughters, and seeing the men cry, and he said, get up, and it just seemed a little bit distasteful.
Yeah. And, the one theme here is, we want America to be great, but how much does it cost? Is it costing a lot? And I've mentioned before that we could look very wealthy if we had a line of credit of millions of dollars, and we have a great line of credit in Washington with us having the reserve currency of the world, with us having the Federal Reserve. Even though they have all this power and all this money, they don't have total control. The markets are eventually more powerful. At one time they said we can keep the dollar, we're a strong country, at $35 an ounce of gold, but eventually the markets catch up. And I think that is what's happening. We, as students of the Austrian School of Economics, can sense when there's bubbles, and they're coming, and they're going to burst, and that's what happened in 08 and 09. But it was the biggest that we've had, since the Depression, and it was significant, and it did frighten a lot of these managers to motivate them to pump in $3.5 trillion. And guess what? It didn't do what they wanted. They thought, oh, that'll stir up the economy again. That's what it's done in the past. But it all gravitated into the hands of the very wealthy and has added fuel to the fire. So there are good times for some people, and people are feeling better, but it is on borrowed money, and it is on big spending. And I argue just the spending is a tax. When you talk about taxes, just spending it. So I wasn't reassured whether we talk about the militarism that goes on or infrastructure development, there's a lot of debt out there. The predictions of debt is going to be much worse, and there will be a cost. And it usually, unfortunately, under the situation we have now, the penalty is dumped on the middle class, the middle class, and that is what's been happening. This last recovery didn't help a lot of people. There's a lot of people, thousands of people, in spite of all these great statistics, are still out on the street, homeless people, which is pretty hard to believe.
And as we've said when we were talking about the show, there weren't a lot of concrete policy proposals, which I think is par for the course in the State of the Union speech. One thing that he did say very specifically, and I was going to see what you thought about it, I guess what you do, he said he wants Congress to pass a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill.
Yeah, infrastructure is a mess, but let's be really old-fashioned and say, well, let's check and find how much authority do we have, to build the highways and take care of all the infrastructures, all the bridges and everything else. And there's not much there. And I think about even building the first interstates. Eisenhower did that, and he says, well, we're not allowed to do this. He says, unless it's national security. So they justified it for national security. We had to have this highway system. And the one thing he mentioned last night, and I tweeted a little bit on this, and that is he mentioned that, yes, we have to have government doing this, but then we have to have business people coming in, and we have to be partners and work on it.
Yeah.
And it sounds good, and it sounds like they've done it a lot, and at times they end up with a project, but I consider that dangerous because I think that's putting two people together that shouldn't be together, and it invites cronyism and crony capitalism, and contracts when the government does it are always political favoritism. So I think it should be done differently, but we're locked into this. This is the way it is. But $1.5 trillion makes people feel good. But I always thought the left would be, pretty much in support of this, and I think they are, because some of this will go into the environmentalism and things like that. But then when they realize that they have to skirt a few more regulations, now the left is getting a little cautious. Matter of fact, the left right now looks like no matter what Trump says, they're going to object to it. It's just that they were pretty glum last night. I'll tell you, they didn't see much there. Of course, there were a few things that made me a little glum too, and that is one that I talked about last night a little bit, was the glorification of militarism. And we've talked a little bit about that, but over the many months we talk about it all the time. And he certainly was pumping it up. Some of his guests made these points about militarism, and the thing that annoyed me is when he pumped it up, I mean, that sometimes drew the loudest applauses.
Yeah.
And so it is one thing. It's the militarism is tied to patriotism, and you see this coming together in a matter of a negative way for our government, our taxpayers' money, to go to the football games and promote this militarism.
Yeah.
And that's annoying. Actually, that's ending up in a negative sense. It's undermined football and these other things that are going on. But no, I was disappointed to see how much excitement there was because Trump was pumping this up. But I think you can be strong. You can have a strong national defense. But if you want to spread Americanism and American goodness, it's not that way. It's not with guns, and it's not with threats. It's not with sanctions. So that to me is very disappointing. And unfortunately, I think that the majority of the American people are not with us. That doesn't prove who's right and who's wrong. But I tell you what, there's a limit to this because that's spending, and we can't afford the constant spending on the military and running an empire, which is a threat to us.
Doesn't all this militarism strike you as kind of anti-American if you think about it? Because if you think about authoritarian and totalitarian regimes in the past, they've always had, look at the Nazis with their parades of endless soldiers, Leni Riefenstahl. Remember the Soviet May Day parades where they would parade all of these weapons? It seems like this worship of military power is really a statist and a totalitarian and therefore an anti-American kind of view. But unfortunately, it really has infected otherwise patriotic Americans. They're confusing militarism with the real patriotism, being in love with really the great things about this
I think
country.
it was Johnson that said that patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel, and they do play on that. And I've been on the receiving end of that. You don't do this, so you're not an American. You're not a good American. You don't support the troops. And yet, I'm convinced in my own mind, as you are, that we can have a strong military, sensible, and not have all this conflict. But right now, what are we talking about? Symbolically, one of the worst things that he mentioned last night was, oh boy, we're not going to close Guantanamo. You know, we love this great symbolism. And just think of what Guantanamo means to the world.
Yeah.
You know, it's torture and ghastly pictures. And that's not American greatness. And that's terrible. And you know, they were getting, because the previous two or three presidents said we ought to close it, we ought to close it. Trump hasn't said that now. And so they haven't had a lot of upkeep. They've had a bunch and they've reduced the number there. But now that they're changing, they say, well, we need about $500 billion to improve this prison down here to take care of them, get them good air conditioners. No, they wouldn't give them air conditioners.
No.
It would be for the guards and things. So that to me was bad symbolism. And just, where are they going to get the prisoners? They don't have enough prisoners right now, but it's endless because of the policy we have, because we make this assumption that, well, we got to gather up the enemy combatants, anybody who doesn't like us or took a shot at us. You know, if you've lost your family and you're in one of these foreign countries because one of our bombs killed their family and they take up a gun and shoot at an American, he's an enemy combatant, and we assume that we have the moral responsibility and the legal responsibility to go about the world in any and every country and gather up these so-called enemy combatants. They get charged with nothing. They have no, there's no rule of law and no trial, and we can put them there, permanent detention, you know, long-term detention with possibly lifetime.
Yeah.
That is not American greatness.
You know, it's funny, I got an email from Colonel Wilkerson this morning. He's on our board of the Ron Paul Institute. And he said, you know, when I was watching him talk about Guantanamo, I thought, what are they going to bring back torture too? And I wrote to him back, I said, that's exactly what Dr. Paul blurted out when he said it. You know, bring back all the golden oldies. But yeah, he wants to keep it open. I think there are about 50-some people left there. They've never been charged with the crime. They've never gone to trial. They've never been proven. So that's why when President Trump last night said we must have all the necessary power to detain terrorists, we don't know that they're terrorists. We do know, however, that when Guantanamo was open, a lot of the people sent there were sent there by people who wanted to settle old scores. You know, we got to Afghanistan and one tribe would say, well, this tribe is a bunch of terrorists. We'd go and pick them up. So it was definitely used for that. But right now it's really an open wound, I think, on our immorality.
And there were some stories about teenagers, 16-year-olds getting put in there, and it's just, to me, a whole mess. But you know, they also Trump is for getting rid of the sequester. You know, the sequester was a technique that was put in place several years ago. Was supposed to limit spending. I don't think it ever worked. They always made exceptions, but he doesn't even want it hanging around that they have to live up to some preconceived ideas of budget. So they want to get rid of the sequester, along with all this ambition on the weapons and nuclear weapons. And I wonder if the military-industrial complex has anything to do with it. Oh, maybe they do. Maybe they have lobbied for this. But anyway, it's fitting the bill. More money, more weapons. Get rid of the sequester. That doesn't matter. And American greatness, we can buy it and borrow the money or print the money. I say it's not going to work. It will fail, and not tomorrow, the next day, but it could be anytime, because we have a fragile system. I think the greatest danger that we face from all this activity around the world is the fact of loss of credibility. And I think the credibility of the United States is being diminished. And there's a lot of people out there that have been hurt by our sanctions. People have died from our sanctions. People have died from our bombs, and the bombs continue. And believe me, they're bipartisan. They're Democrat bombs and Republican bombs. Yeah. And then when you see the announcement how great we are with our militarism, our political leaders in Washington, as we witnessed last night, a lot of loud cheers for it.
Yeah. You talk about a loss of credibility, and that's such a good point, because nobody wants us to be involved in mediation anymore. If you think about it, around the world, conflicts are being resolved explicitly because they ask us not to participate. North Korea and South Korea, all of a sudden, when they finally had a meeting, they realized, hey, let's find some ways to work together, and that's progressing. They didn't want us involved. The same thing in Syria. We go down in there and we pound the table and say Assad must go. They don't want us part of the negotiations. The same is true, even ironically, with the Israel and Palestine conflict. We come in there and we pound our fists and say, here's where the embassy is going to be, and both sides saying, okay, well, this kind of, so our bombastic view, our bombastic approach to these things makes us much less credible around the world.
Yeah, and I think this loss of credibility, the militarism that we have, is we've overextended ourselves. The domestic spending that we're involved in and planning to increase all puts pressure on one thing. Ultimately, the big test will be the dollar, the value of the dollar. But in the last 15 months, the dollar has been going down. It's been down about 12, 13%. And that's a significant move. And if that continues or accelerates, this will be brought to an end because of financial reasons. And it also will be for, under those conditions, there will be the raising of the interest rates. Now, the Fed has declared we're going to start selling off a little bit, of their balance sheet, which will push interest rates up. But they're very, very cautious, and they can quit any time. But the markets can push up interest rates even without the Fed saying we're going to raise your interest rates or lower it. They've been able to take them to zero and keep them there for 10 years. But when people lose confidence, people will quit borrowing. That means people will quit buying our Treasury bills, and some of that is going on. So this is self-limiting, and the big question is how long is this going to last? Are we poorer? I think we're getting poorer. Can I prove it by what people are showing and what they own right now? Not in the news, and not when you look at the stock market, even though the stock market's pretty shaky right now. But that is borrowed money, it's printed money, it's distributing the money poorly. The Fed can do this. They can pump it into Wall Street. And what happens? Salaries go up, bonuses go up, buybacks go up, mergers go up, all these things, and they get wealthier and wealthier. But it is not sound economic policy. That's why nobody should get euphoric about the economy right now. We should be pleased because, if we look for a positive, I think that the taxes, lowering the taxes, has been helpful. But I want to get rid of the income tax. I don't want all this taken. But taxes have been reduced by some people. And I think Trump is a great cheerleader, and he's done some reduction on regulations, but his cheerleading is important. The psychology of a nation is important too. It helps establish values of dollars and gives an impression. And I think what he's done there, people are optimistic and people are more willing, but we'll have to wait and see what happens if all the money comes back. Money's been pumped out there, $1,000 here, $1,000 there. I keep thinking that is good. Everybody's going to be happy about it. But what if you're a family, you have credit card debt of $20,000, you have student debt of $60,000, and you have a mortgage, and you get $1,000 or $2,000? Maybe you'll say, well, that'll make 1 month payment on my debt.
Yeah.
The debt is so big that this is just tinkering on the edges, because we have to change the philosophy of what the government is all about. And it's not about managing the world, policing the world, and managing the whole economy and building everybody's bridges and taking over all these responsibilities of the state, making sure everybody gets free stuff. Yeah. It can't work. It's done pretty well so far, but I think the signs are there that we may have peaked out. The dollar has probably peaked out on the world stage. And if you look at 1971 on most other currencies, the dollar has done this. Many of the currencies, and in some ways, the dollar is as strong as it is now because there's so many other countries that have worse conditions. But ultimately, though, the market will dictate this, and we'll have to pay the bills.
Well, I think President Trump should listen to what you say when you say be careful about tying your flag to the mast of the economy, because it can go up and down. I'd just like to remind our viewers, if you like the show, if you like real news, if you like Ron Paul's perspective, subscribe to our channel. Tell your friends and family to subscribe to our channel. Help us grow and reach more people. Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in to listen to our rehash of the State of the Union message. We looked hard to look for some positive things, and there were a few things. But overall, we're not talking about, the speech and exactly what went on last night or last week. We're talking about something that's been going on for a long time, maybe 100 years. The real undermining of the limitations on government that were supposed to help us in the Constitution that have been totally ignored. Whether it's the income tax or the Federal Reserve System, the welfare state, or our militarism. That is more structural. It's much, much bigger than the administration of the past year. There are so many problems there that that have been there for a long time. So I believe that nothing changes until the American people have a perception of what the role of government ought to be. And for me, it's very simple. The role of government should be there to preserve our liberties and let the people take care of themselves. And that would be a real revolution. Well, someday we'll have it, and we will keep promoting that real revolution. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report.